Hello, good people, and welcome to the Higher Living Podcast. This is episode 11, and today we have in studio a very interesting chap, a man by the name of Stephan Gous. You know my normal introduction, so I don't want to steal anyone else's thunder, so I'll give Stephan an opportunity to introduce himself. Why I find Stephan's story fascinating is really, geared at what he does at the moment, which is helping organizations, large corporate multinational organizations, as well as other smaller organizations, to reinvent themselves through the implementation of cognitively intelligent automation solutions. And it is really, we are now living in the digital age. There's these lovely terms about fourth industrial revolution and all of these concepts. But Stephan is the gentleman that leads the South African practice around, the practicalities of implementing these type of solutions. And, I'm just so excited to share Stephan's story with all our listeners and give him an opportunity to tell us what's happening in the market. So without further ado, Stephan Gous, welcome to the High Living Podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, Sean. I'm doing really well, and thanks for the invitation. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you, man, and thank you for being open to spending this time with us. Stephan, it's this show has morphed so much over the last few weeks and few months, I would say, and it's really become a show where I feel I give people a platform to share their story. Now, the backdrop of the High Living Podcast is really around helping people to find those little golden nuggets and those little pieces of information that allows them to transcend their lives. We find a lot of people in today's world are stuck. A lot of people in today's world are nervous of making big career changes, life changes. And, I think after speaking to people like yourselves and some of our other guests, it gives people the confidence to move ahead with their lives. And that's really the backdrop of what we're trying to achieve on the podcast. And in context to that, do you want to give us an introduction of, who Stephan Gous is, where your story begins, and how it is that you ended up representing such a major market player? I dare to say the best technology in the world in terms of robotic process automation and other softwares that has now joined the suite. Maybe if you want to start us off by just giving us a flavor of who you are.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. Again, thanks very much for the invite. So about myself, it's always difficult to speak about yourself, almost in the third person. But I live in Centurion, or midstream for that matter, but grew up in Nelspruit. So really came from what was then a small town and eventually moved up here after studying, and eventually got into the IT game. Always had a passion for information technology, so it's something I really grew up with. So from the games that we played with many floppy disks and so on, it really grew into a passion, computers and everything IT related. So from there, I eventually had different roles that I fulfilled with a number of companies in South Africa. So from distribution to a multinational corporation, EMC, that's really a great company and was ultimately acquired by Dell Technologies, into a small company at one point, and also then eventually got into this automation game. So after the small company that I worked for, I joined a small multinational company that represented workflow solutions, and spent about 3 years with them. And after that, and this was probably going back about 8 years ago now. So got into this automation thing really where it's dedicated. It was a very deliberate move from, for instance, an EMC, which was a very, very big corporate with over 45,000 people globally, into a more smaller environment. And, so I wanted to look for something a little bit smaller after moving on from EMC, but also looking for something that is primarily software driven and SaaS driven. So, back, let's call it 8-10 years ago, I really started seeing that the world is moving to a very software defined future. and cloud future. Even though it wasn't as big as it currently is globally and even in South Africa, um, there was really a lot of indicators that that's where everything will be leading to ultimately is, we're going to consolidate a lot more work into the cloud, and a lot more software is going to drive the world.
Yeah, I mean, EMC is a massive organization, like you say. And, was it a bit daunting, deciding to leave an organization that gives you the stability that an EMC does, also give you the portability globally that an EMC does, to now this, I don't want to say small, but in context to South Africa, a smaller shop where, you need to do a lot more, and you need to be a lot more multi-skilled in terms of what you want to do and able to do. Was that a difficult decision for you to make, Stephan?
In some regards, yes. So I think the fact that with EMC, as you say, it's a global player, and it's got a lot of gravitas in the market. Moving into a smaller environment, you don't necessarily have the brand, that strong brand that you can rely on, and you really have to go and sell on your own abilities and value proposition into the market. So it wasn't daunting. It was probably more just a transition to get used to. So, but that's still a very, very, it was a great experience. And I think through the different, the exposure with different types of companies, it's given me a fairly broad overview of the market, so as mentioned, from distribution to the actual supplier of software and hardware at a global scale, in a very big way, down to the actual provider interfacing with the customer. So I've got a fairly broad spectrum of experiences in engaging and supplying these solutions to customers and partners.
Yeah, and another interesting point that you made, which I think is very relevant for our listeners, is the fact that you saw where the market was going. You were in the IT field. You had an appreciation for what EMC took to market and many other players, but you saw that SaaS, software as a service, cloud, robotics, all of these things were starting to rear their heads, and they were starting to become, for lack of a better word, some of the buzzwords that most of our CIOs start using. And it's important to also realize that you then decided that there's a shift that you need to make in your personal life to keep up with the times.
Absolutely. And trust me when I say it wasn't necessarily an easy decision to make at that stage, because these things were still developing concepts. So even though it was proven globally, and a number of early movers and adopters had taken that decision to move to cloud, there was still a lot of apprehension within the local market. People loved the idea of actually having a server in their environment or on their premises that they can almost touch and feel and hug the server and their data, which is sitting in the server, and believing that they've got better security and control of that data sitting on their premises, as opposed to that data living in the cloud somewhere. Now the reality, as we've probably seen over the last number of years, is that the complexity of protecting data, if it's sitting in your own environment, is so great. And if you compare that, upskilling a team and having the security specialists that can protect the data, for instance, as opposed to a global player like a Microsoft or an Amazon or a Google, that spend billions and billions of dollars on protecting that data and ensuring, because their value proposition in the market for cloud is just as good as their ability to protect customer data out there. So hence they can't compromise on that fact.
Yeah, and I mean, just to call it out and to spell it out for some of our listeners who are not as tech savvy as you are, typically what would happen, and Stephan, please jump in and correct me if I don't do justice to this explanation, but typically, historically, what would happen is that these major organizations would actually have a data center or a data environment on site or in another physical location not too far from their current premises. And they would house racks and racks of servers and infrastructure and all of these things that would power their businesses. But as to your point, it was a very touchy-feely thing because you could leave the office, go to the data center, and actually see the servers working, which meant, and a lot of the clients then, from a backup perspective, would back up based on that those physical servers, and then take it offsite in terms of tape and things. But now with cloud computing, there need not be that physical environment. The data need not reside locally. It need not reside on what they call on premises. It now resides in an Amazon's data center that is somewhere in the world, and that is protected. So it's quite a large mind shift for clients to also make, because all of a sudden the control factor, which you are talking about in terms of the security, the control factor is no longer there. Because it's residing somewhere else.
Exactly that, Sean. And it took a mind shift. It definitely took a mind shift for executives and leaders to just take that decision to say, you know what, we convinced. And you started seeing this over the last number of years, then that shift towards the cloud. And if you look at all the major banks and enterprise companies out there in South Africa, they've absolutely adopted cloud and SaaS-based software today. So very glad to say this has happened. You do find, and I think we all understand and realize that South Africa is a little bit more conservative sometimes in the way that we adopt technology in the IT world. We could, in some cases, be up to 2-3 years behind certain capabilities or releases that happen. So, yeah, I think it's just getting people used to the idea and kind of normalizing this for them.
Yeah, and the reality of the situation is, and if you look at the banking example, right, a bank's value proposition is to provide financial services solutions to clients, not to be IT services providers. So in a case where you're looking at the bigger picture, an organization like Amazon, who spent billions of dollars in terms of perfecting the solutions around the management and protection of data, it makes a lot of sense to use them as an outsourced partner to do what they do, because it relieves the bank of the obligation and the effort to try and do something that's not their core business.
Absolutely, Sean, and it's actually a very nice segue into the automation piece as well. You alluded to that a little bit earlier, but it's something, automation isn't just RPA, and RPA isn't the only thing in automation. There's different automation capabilities out there. I mentioned workflow, for instance, as one of the things that I worked in before in my life. So various workflow solutions. So workflow would really be a capability where you integrate different departments and things with a, I think it's kind of led more towards a drag and drop type of experience. But workflow and business process management was one of the key areas that also started off way back. And workflow kind of morphed into what is today robotic process automation. So what workflow tended to do was integrate more into APIs, and it required a lot more coding experience. So you would have to have some kind of a coding background, whether that is a C# or .NET, or really it's more a coder's tool. And the types of projects that you would get into there is a lot more technical, and there's certain standards. Even if you look at BPMN standards and those kind of things, it starts getting quite technical.
Okay, easy, Tiger. You now we need to reel you in a little bit here, because now you're going a few steps forward. So tell me now, when did your journey with automation anywhere begin?
So journey started off in May 2019.
Okay, and that was that your real first flavor of what we want to, and I want to say this word, and because I think it is really a word that at the moment has got people, really thinking a lot about it, which is artificial intelligence. But was this your first experience working with products, software products that are artificially intelligent?
No, actually, the previous company that I worked with, it's a smaller, and for the purposes of this conversation, I'm not going to call out their name, but
Sure, sure.
they're multinational, and they specialized more so in workflow. They also had some flavors of artificial intelligence embedded into their technology.
Okay.
And they ultimately, coming from workflow, they gravitated towards RPA. So they weren't a pure play RPA software provider. So
Okay.
it's something. It's definitely something that we're seeing in the industry. And I won't get technical on this, but it's something in the industry that is very evident, is that RPA is definitely a very qualified and mature technology now globally, because there's, all the major players. If you talk about SAP, Microsoft, Salesforce, anyone that is anyone, have acquired their flavor of RPA and want to get in on the action of what RPA can deliver for the customer.
So give us dumb it down for us now, right? So RPA is robotic process automation.
That's right.
What does robotic process automation actually offer a client?
So RPA, and I think that I'll explain what RPA is, and then I'll explain, maybe after that we can get into the evolution of how RPA has evolved, because it certainly has evolved from what just is robotic process automation into intelligent automation. But let's start with RPA. So RPA is software. It's got nothing to do with hardware and robots and machines that we see in the movies.
So it's not a Terminator, right? You're not.
No.
Okay.
No. So it's not a Terminator. It's a piece of software that typically businesses would use in automating business processes. So how you do this is it uses a drag and drop and configure type of interface that you can then integrate through either the front end of the application, so the user interface, the same way that a user would log into a ERP system, like whether it's a SAP or a Sage, or we can configure a software bot, as we call it, to log into a system and then perform these routines that you can then automate the manual and mundane and repetitive processes that you find that exists in many organizations. The types of processes, and we're not limited to any specific industry. So it spans any industry. So whether it's telco or banking or insurance, or it really is not limited to any specific industry, because any business out there has manual and repetitive steps and business processes that happen between different people. So
so this bot that you put down is actually for lack of a better word, a digital worker.
It's a digital worker.
It's an employee that you can have that can perform exactly the same functions that, as provided the functions are on a computer, that an employee could perform. So could it read your email? Could it? I mean, is there limits in terms of what the thing can and can't do?
It can't think like a human. Okay. So as much as we talk about artificial intelligence, and I think this is very important to have people understand as well. So it's built to automate repetitive processes. So where there's a routine, and typically organizations have many applications, so we can integrate with any application, really any application, whether it's an old application like a mainframe, or whether it's a new modern web-based application, or even when it's a homegrown application. So there's nothing that we can't integrate with. And we integrate, again, like through the front end or the back end, through APIs or the user interface. So can integrate with anything, and you can then design the business process, the steps in the business process. So essentially, it's almost like a workflow for the process that you then design. But typically, we also then have points in the process where a human still needs to make a decision. So we can then break out, for instance, to send a person an email and ask for their approval, where they can type yes, no, approved, communicate over email, or it could be a portal. So there's many different integration points that we can use, and try and keep the process as simple and intuitive as possible, so it's not difficult for a person to learn. It's systems that they're familiar with. It's a business process that they're familiar with, and we kind of use the tools that the business has. You don't need to go and deploy a brand new system now to have, for instance, new capabilities to allow you to serve customer requests. We can integrate RPA with those systems that you have, and have done so quite successfully. In fact, where customers have a legacy system where the technology is outdated, and maybe they want to surface new capabilities or integrate it with other systems, so the business process spans different systems. RPA is a great tool to deploy.
Where I find it phenomenal is if you look at certain industries, like let's take retail, for example. We know that towards the end of the year, around December, Christmas bonus time, retail explodes. The retail environment typically explodes. So the processing required in a retail environment in December is substantially different to the processing capacity required in January and February, right? And what I find amazing through this technology is the ability to ramp up digital employees as and when you need it. So instead of now hiring people for a period of time, you program a team of bots that basically work 24/7, and they can help organizations get through these massive key process times or bulk processing times. And once the period is over, you literally turn them off.
That's it. That's exactly it. And that's really the what the company is built around. So we want to deploy bots to unleash the human potential out there. And that, if we start, that's one of the first things that we start talking about when we meet with new customers is, don't let people do manual and repetitive things, because I haven't come across someone that loves just doing the same thing over and over and over and moving data just from one application to the next and not being able to add value to the process and the company mission and vision. Moving data from one application to the next doesn't add a lot of value, and it's not fulfilling for humans. So that's why we want to deploy bots to do those unfulfilling things, because there is a data explosion. There's too few people, and this is a global phenomenon. There's too few people to fulfill these things. So we need to use people a lot more clever in areas that they can add that value. And where people can add value is really in things like, if we free up their time, is better customer engagement in the contact center environments and customer-facing environments. So engaging our customers a lot better and spending time with the actual customer instead of just moving data from one application to the next. You can unleash better opportunity identification in the workplace. So if the finance team is not stuck in, just capturing invoices and things like these from paper and then extracting that information into the ERP system and extracting it for payment, and then reporting, for instance, that they have to compile reporting, we can really have them much better analyze the data and find the areas where they can positively impact the company top line and bottom line. And
it's such an important point. Sorry to cut you off there, but it's such an important point because I think that there's a stigma in the market that suggests that people lose their jobs through the implementation of this type of technology.
I can, and this is something I relate to, and this is why I always address this as one of the first things that in the conversation. Whether it happens, you can't deny that it sometimes happens, but I can certainly say with confidence, and because I've been involved in so many projects, it is a topic that is very sensitive in South Africa, and for that matter, I do want to understand and do want to address it when I speak to prospects and customers. And the number of times that I've come across areas in South Africa where people have actually lost their jobs is absolutely minimal. In the majority of cases, it tends to happen is, if we think of a accounts payable process, headcount freeze has been going for many companies, I believe, since COVID. So workload in the meantime hasn't reduced. The workload keeps growing. So what then tends to happen is to offset some of these shortages that they have in human capital. What some companies are doing is deploying digital workers to fill the gap. Or there might be a shortage in the broader company as a whole, and then they start to automate and redeploy people from one area that they were specialized in into another where they can add a lot more value. Within the finance team, for instance. So, no, honestly, in South Africa especially, I haven't come across many projects where people have been laid off because of robots being deployed.
And I mean, this concept around intelligent automation that you mentioned a bit earlier, how is the environment changing? How is the tech changing? How is the intelligence becoming? Because I've also seen that, in terms of some of the collateral that's available in the market, that there's a very much a focus now on the capability becoming more intelligent. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking back a number of years, then RPA was the foundation for all of this, to be able to connect different business processes with any application out there. So that's really the genesis of where everything then started. So how it evolved then is that obviously artificial intelligence then started becoming a lot more pervasive and accessible for more companies. Now, it's difficult to hire, a data scientist or an artificial intelligence specialist and start building your own artificial intelligence. So having something like RPA where it's embedded into the technology and you're able to get the benefits of artificial intelligence in a platform that is easy to deploy and manage and quick to value. So that's how it kind of started off. But it started popping up first in requirements, for instance, going back about 5-6 years ago, deploying artificial intelligence in understanding and mapping the documents that we work with. Around 80% of information in most companies come in a non-digital format, paper, PDF that's not structured, JPEG files, etc., etc. So it comes in an unstructured format, and until it's structured in a way that a computer can then, and with structured we mean, for instance, either putting it into a database or into an Excel table, for instance. So that would mean that it's now structured, that I can tell a computer, go to cell number A3 and you'll find the piece of information that you're looking for. So until it's structured, we can't do much with that data. So that was the first thing, is using artificial intelligence and machine learning to structure unstructured data. And it uses, many different AI capabilities. One that is probably familiar to most people is OCR, optical character recognition. But OCR by itself is a valuable capability because it would look for data in a specific place. Now, as soon as you start adding artificial intelligence into this, and then you can say, I'm looking for the invoice number. Now, the artificial intelligence will give you the capability to look for the invoice number, irrespective whether it's sitting on the top left-hand side of the page or the bottom right-hand side of the page. It will go look for invoice number and find invoice number, and then tell you, I found this invoice number, and this is, by the way, this is the invoice number for this particular invoice. So it also has natural language processing where, for instance, built into our platform, we have the capability to understand over 100 languages and fuzzy logic, computer vision, etc. So this is where it gets very nerdy, and we have to don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But the next area then, after we got this ability to really extract the valuable information out of documents, The next area that started becoming very, very interesting is how do we accelerate this automation initiative? Because it takes a long time to understand the business process. And normally this would be done by people. So you would deploy a team of people going out into a business and then having almost interviews with the subject matter experts in the business to understand what is the business process, what applications do they work with, how do they handle exceptions, etc. And that can be very time consuming. Both for the guy doing the, gathering the information, as well as the guy needing to provide that information. So very, very time consuming. And this has been a point, breakdown point where you can only scale as fast as you can gather that information. So that's where a lot of investment then went into to apply artificial intelligence capabilities in that area, that we can use a data-driven approach to understand the process. So we use essentially a sensor that is deployed to a computer that a person is working on, and that we can then observe how they do their work and map the business processes that they work in, understand the different applications that they work in, even understand down to the different screens, how much time are they spending on a particular screen. So this allows us then to kind of build a visual map of how a process would work. And we can then use that information for a number of things. It is not just to see if it's a potential candidate for automation, which, that is one of the outcomes. But we can also then determine if maybe the guy spends too much time on a particular screen. Maybe there's training that needs to be done, that we need to increase training for particular areas. Or potentially it could show that there's maybe some process re-engineering that we could do to improve the process.
It's a very important point because, sometimes when you're going through the manual exercise, 95%, and I just make up that number to illustrate the majority of the time is spent putting together the process maps, and the minority of the time is spent actually analyzing what it means. And in this case, what I'm hearing you say is that we are able to pull out the so what, to that point you just made about training. So someone's spending a lot of time on this process. Why? Maybe the training in terms of what they're able to do around the specific screen needs to be relooked at. Sorry to cut you off there, Stephan.
Not at all. No, and I think the final thing, is that if it's not automated, you're not re-engineering the process, or the person doesn't need training. Maybe there's a business case that the actual process can be outsourced. That's one of the outcomes, where you say, I don't want to be bogged down with this process. I would much rather give it to a specialist within this area that will take care of it, and I farm that piece of the process, I farm out to someone.
Yeah.
So different outcomes for different areas. But yes, this is now let's call it the new frontier, where artificial intelligence is really blazing the trail and showing tremendous value. And I think the benefit Sean, the benefit, if you compare the old way of doing things, where it's a person doing interviews and meeting with different stakeholders in the business, as opposed to this new way, the benefits that we see is that using a data-driven approach is unbiased. You're not going to get specific answers or a perfect world example of, we're going to observe this person over a 2 or 3 week period of doing their job, and we will get the really what are they doing down to the granular level, and understanding how the work is done. And it's not just one process, it's all the processes that they work in. In fact, we start building a business case then to see what are the processes that they interact with the most. Because those would be,
And you can also narrow that down. So if the person is on the internet banking every now and then, or Facebook, you can remove those parameters, I'm sure, so that, you're only getting the measurement around the actual business process that they're undertaking.
Absolutely. Data privacy is a very hot topic globally. So nothing happens if it's not within the confines of data privacy. So this entire solution is, for instance, GDPR compliant, used by banks, etc., globally. So
it's very interesting.
Yes,
it's very interesting. But now tell me, if you had to close your eyes now and vision, the technology is just the rate at which it is maturing and it is growing and it is diversifying and integrating is just mind-blowing. It's exponential. Where do you think we are in 10 years' time? What do you think we'll be offering clients in 10 years' time around this type of technology?
Wow.
Bit of an unfair question, eh? Caught you off guard.
Yeah, no. So well, I can tell you more medium-term views. I haven't even thought as far as 10 years from now, to be honest with you, because even the medium term is mind-boggling. And we are, if I look at where the products are leading to, you most probably will find that, we wouldn't even have to build the bots even more. It's more so going to be about the envisioning and using people to kind of decide, make more cognitive decisions on which areas would best benefit from automation. The actual bot exercise of building the software bots, the digital workers, most of that would be taken care of by software and artificial intelligence.
Sure.
And from there, people will still be required to tweak the process and ensure that logically it makes sense. But the grunt work, I think, would be taken care of by artificial intelligence. So we basically just then apply our minds on ensuring that it is as efficient and as good as it possibly can be.
Could it be in a situation where everyone has got their little artificial intelligent bot that they've got on their desktop that they use to do the mundane, that they use to communicate with the broader enterprise level bots? Would it be a situation where we've each got these little assistants that are helping us focus on the quality of the value that we're really driving in our specific roles?
Absolutely, that is it's a great way that you explained it. And if you think about it, we have these digital assistants on our phones. So you've got a Alexa, you've got a Siri, Google Assistant, etc. So you call them out. So in our personal lives, we've got these digital assistants where you can search the web and perform many tasks from the phone. Yet in our work lives, where's the digital assistant in the work life, where you spend so much of your time and energy and effort? And that is actually, one of the current things that we're seeing globally as a huge uptake, especially as far as customer-facing and contact center type environments, that we can drive super efficient engagements in those contexts.
Yeah.
So that is something. So we have brought out a product, and I know this is not a product discussion, but Automation Anywhere Robotic Interface. It's really an assistant type of thing that allows you to just work at much greater efficiencies.
Okay.
And this is something that we are seeing starting to scale globally. So if you look at, for instance, the US and Europe, those markets are embracing these kind of things very aggressively. And I guess, it has started in South Africa, but it's not yet at the level that we're seeing, for instance, globally.
Yeah, and that's a great bridge into the next topic that I wanted to chat to you about, which is, what are some of the barriers to entry and some of the challenges that you experience? I mean, when we have these type of conversations, and we've had many in the past, for me, it seems like an absolute no-brainer. But it's practically, when you go out to market and you meet clients, it's sometimes very difficult to get these things across the line. And what are some of the challenges that you're finding in terms of the adoption and driving higher rates of adoption?
So I think people need to, and we can talk about it for hours. I've seen this very often. I'm going to explain it perhaps by way of an example. So I can show slides, talk about it, and tell a customer, what we've seen with customers that deploy these technologies are things like, for instance, a 20% growth in revenue, or 30% cost savings, or 30 to 40% improvement in operational metrics. So there's very tangible benefits that we can quote a customer, and typically we find, for instance, when deploying, we help a customer build the business case, and our customers typically find in South Africa specific, find that they can reach a 100% ROI within about the first 9 to 10 months, because we work it out and we work towards a plan and to achieve that return on investment. So very often customers are suspect of this and think, is this too good to be true?
Yeah.
No, it isn't. If you work with a stated goal and you plan towards that goal, then it is possible. Taking an example, currently working with a customer where they process in excess of 250,000 invoices a year. It took a person around 10 to 12 minutes to process an invoice. This is now from the capturing to actually uploading the information into SAP. When we in deploying that process now to a bot that takes care of that, it now takes around 6 to 10 seconds per invoice to process the same.
Mind blowing.
Yeah. So, the results actually, we kind of guesstimated some results for the customer, and in the end, the results actually blew us away as well. That was a pretty stellar result that we achieved there. But yes, it is possible, and I think that the thing is that we are playing in a global economy and global stage. So, people tend to think we've got plenty of labor and lots of people that can actually do the job, but we also need to look at driving efficiency and customer experience and these very important points into the local market as well.
And I mean, sometimes I think that also customers get a little bit nervous when they look at these type of technologies, because they think that the journey to get to benefit is going to be extremely painful, extremely complex, extremely time consuming. What is the model that you guys take to market in terms of migrating a customer through this journey, and helping them just to integrate this, because there's a massive change component as well. And how do you guys look at just easing a customer into using this technology?
Yeah, it's a very good point you make there, because it's not a silver bullet. It's not one thing that can fix all your problems, but it certainly can bring about very radical transformation in a company. So typically, you can do a lot of things with us, but you don't want to start with everything. So when you start, it's really about getting the value and proving the value internally. So that value is almost one of the key things that we want to start with, is proving the value internally at the customer that we're working with. So we want to make it as easy as possible to start. In fact, we've defined it into 3 distinct phases. So it's the start, the scale, and the transformation phase that customers would go through. Typically, the start, you're looking at the first, once they deploy the software and they've got, maybe they've done a proof of concept or they're in a proof of value. So in the start phase, it's really about ensuring that you can get the first process out as quick as possible. So typically, you don't want to start with the most complex thing. You want to start with something that can show value, as in it frees up people's time. Maybe it's not end to end yet, so it's maybe you haven't automated the entire accounts payable, accounts receivable, or tax department. It's just a portion of, but at least you're showing immediate results where you're freeing up time for people, and we want to do that absolutely within the first 3 months. We don't even, if we can, maybe even bring it down to a month. Get a project out. Don't overcomplicate things. Get it out and prove value, and that then we'll start getting more people interested, because obviously at exco level and different departmental levels, people talk, and people will talk about this and say, wow, we are actually seeing the benefit of this process that is now automated, which will automatically lead into the next phase, which is the scale phase. So in the scale phase, maybe you started with one process in finance. In the scale phase, maybe that starts going into more processes within the finance department that starts getting automated. So that's really, will naturally progress into the transformation phase, where it goes then from, for instance, between different departments, and almost an automation first strategy in the transform phase. So start is about, let's say, 3 months. The scale phase, you're looking at 3 months to a year. maybe even 18 months. And the transformation phase, I'd say anything between 12 to 18 months that customers start looking at their transformation phase.
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think that, and I hope that everyone listening is learning something about this type of technology, because it really is cutting edge. And what I appreciate most about automation anyway is the focus in terms of what it is that they do intrinsically and what you guys do intrinsically as an organization. You're not everything to everyone, and then you've got a small RPA piece on the side. You guys focus on RPA, and you are now building an ecosystem that is representative of the specialization that you guys have. It's really phenomenal. I mean, some of the numbers around your funding and your Series B funding, and you guys are boxing with some of the big names out there, and I think that it is really a privilege for organizations to work with people as focused as you.
Fantastic. Yeah. No, again, thanks for the privilege to join the podcast, Sean. It's really been fantastic, and I would love to actually get one of my colleagues, David, who's also a let's call it a propeller head. But he's very passionate about this technology, and also engaged across Africa. So I am working across Africa at this stage, and it's also very interesting to see how this technology and capability is being adopted through Africa, for that matter. So it's not just limited to South Africa.
Fantastic. I look forward to having David on. We'll chat to you offline about that. But Stephan, once again, thank you so much for your time. It's been an amazing conversation. As usual, you and I can talk about this for till the cows come home. But we look forward to having yourself and David back on the show. Thank you so much again for your time. It's been incredibly insightful, and I wish you all the very best in terms of the journey that you're now undertaking.
Thanks very much, Sean. Really appreciate it. All the best.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of episode 11. It's been an absolute privilege to be with you once again. Guys, as usual, if you can do one thing only, and that's stay inspired. Cheers.